Well, this morning we find ourselves on Mother's Day, and it's a good time to honor our moms and the women in the room. And we have an interesting way of trying to do this morning because we made a decision earlier this year that if we're not in a sermon series, that we would cover a psalm on that Sunday. And so we're in between sermon series this morning. And so I needed to try to pick out a psalm that has something to do with moms on Mother's Day. And there's not one exactly, but there's a few that deal with families. And so we will deal with Psalm 128 here in a moment. But let me give an introduction to our sermon series that will start next week. It's called Whiff, where we're going to use the strong sense of smell and the different odors that come from the scripture text to lead us to Christ. We're willing to wager that even the sense of smell is going to lead us to Christ. I hope that piques your interest and that you show up in the next few weeks and find out about some of those smells. We're going to smell what Jesus is cooking, if you will, on Sunday morning. That was terrible. Dad joke. Nevertheless, here we are on Mother's Day, and what an amazing moment for the life of the church, to honor our moms for all that they do and who they are to us. This has been something that's been a part of the church life even before President Woodrow Wilson made it an official holiday in our culture in 1914, but the church has placed it in her calendar each year, a Mothering Sunday, where we honor our moms in our midst. Specifically because the mother of Jesus was such an influential part of the whole gospel story. And so we have these time each and every year in the month of May to talk about moms and what it means for the life of faith. And I just want to start off by saying I think mothers and motherhood is quite magical. I just think that you have interesting superpowers, and I'd like to talk about those a little bit this morning, particularly as it is involving shaping Christian community. But let me start, if you will, just humor me for a minute with a couple of church, savvy mom jokes to start off the talk this morning. The first one comes from Calvin Trillin, because his name rhymes with Skillin. We'll start there. He says, "The most remarkable thing about my mother is that for 30 years, she served the family nothing but leftovers. The original meal has never been found." Can I hear an amen? Yeah. Superpower, right? Where did this come from, right? How about this next one? I thought this one was really good. Something's not lost until mom can't find it. Somebody applied this logic this morning, even on the way to church. Kid lost something. Nope, mom found it, and there it is. I think there's a reason that we honor moms. Y'all do so much, and most of those things we don't even see. But I think as in regards to the life of the church, there's a couple, I want to create a bit of a tension at the first here this morning is this. We need to honor those who are moms among us. They have this uncanny connection with the young in our life, those who are being trained in the faith. I saw this in a unique way when the Skillins and some family friends were out at a park one day, and they have 4 kids. We have 2 kids. We used to play man-to-man defense in the Skillin household, and so we were there, and the kids ran off because they all knew each other. It was a park in the Atlanta area, and all of a sudden, as we were talking there was this blood-curdling scream from Ezra in the distance because he had stood in an anthill, and ants were crawling all over him. And so I heard it from over here, so I took a step towards the commotion, but then I looked back to see if Ginger or I were going to go help him. And in that moment of stepping away and then stepping back, Ginger had thrown the purse. She had put her hair back like Rambo, and she got a couple of heavy things from the ground. And she's like, okay, who needs to get a beat down for like injuring my son right now? And so I just remember like there was just something came over her because of what she heard in the distance. And after her nervous system was able to calm down, and as we spent some time together, she said there was only one other time she had heard that scared scream from Ezra, and she knew that she needed to go do something about it. Isn't it interesting that she had cataloged these times of interaction with our kids? It reminded me of a film that you may have seen before, the film The Forgotten. And the basic plot of it is that there's the main character, Julianne Moore. She's got a son who is taken away from her. And she has this faint memory of having a son, but everyone in her life is unaware that she's ever had a son. It's like one day everybody knew that she had Sam, but then Sam was taken, and then everybody felt like she was crazy because they don't remember Sam being in their midst. And so the whole movie has all these twists and turns. It was made in 2004. If you haven't seen it by now, I could spoil it. It's past the statute of limitations here. And so towards the end of the movie, we found out the whole premise of the movie is that some higher life form was conducting experiments upon the human species. And they found that it was really interesting, this connection between mothers and their children. And they had this hypothesis: could we somehow sever this connection between a mom and her kids? And so they began to take kids away from their mothers and wiping their memories clean to see if there's a way that they can take the memories out of their mind. But Julianne Moore's character refused to be denied. And she reached all the way to the end. She has this interesting conversation with one of these higher life form beings. And this is what he said: your connection, mother to child, it's like an invisible tissue. We can even measure its energy. There's somehow this ligament that connects a mom and her kids. And as our kids begin to take shape and form, and as we begin to train them in that next generation of Christian leaders, moms are valuable in our midst because they seem to have a connection like no other in helping our kids see Jesus. And because of that, we must honor you on a day like Mother's Day, and really every other day, but certainly on Mother's Day among us. But I think also we have to keep in mind that Mother's Day is a difficult holiday for some of the people in our community, because there are some women in our midst who are dying to be moms. Because of some scenarios and circumstances, they're unable to be moms. And so they arrive to worship on a Mother's Day, and as some women in our community are being honored, they sit in silence and wonder, when is it going to be their turn? And they begin to ask themselves these questions of, what have I done to prevent me from being out of reach to this dream that I have deep in my heart? Recently, I read an op-ed by Paula Carter called "I'm Not a Mother, But I Am Something." And she's just sharing her story about wanting to be a mom and the different shape and contours of what it means to be a mother in our culture. She was dating a guy with kids, and they were sharing life together. And there was a few times as they were going deeper and deeper in their relationship that if one of the boys was crying out and was unable to be soothed by dad, they would push dad away and ask stepmom to come and to comfort them. But she remembers one day going to church with her mom, and it was on a Mother's Day, and the preacher asked all the mothers to stand, and she had to sit while her mom and other biological moms got to stand. And she remembers how kind of lonely and isolated that felt, but it even got worse after service was over because a man from the congregation chased her down, and he tapped her on the shoulder, and he said, "May I ask, what is wrong?" And she's like, excuse me. Almost to say she was out of place as a woman if she wasn't a biological mother. And she grappled and she wrestled with that. And in the midst of her op-ed, she quotes this amazing quotation from philosopher Maria Popova. She says, "To name a thing is to acknowledge its existence and as separate from everything else that has a name. To confer upon it the dignity of autonomy while at the same time affirming its belonging with the rest of the nameable world." Or to put it another way, what Paula felt during worship on that morning was that she was a to-be-determined person without a name. And if there's a community where there should be no to-be-determined type of people, it is the church. Let's keep in mind that as Adam and Eve are beginning their journey, that Adam confers the name Eve, which means the mother of the living, before she actually gives birth to Cain, her first child. There are times when you can mother without being a biological mother. And that doesn't take away from the biological mothers in this room, but it certainly affirms the spiritual mothers that we have in our midst from all the women in our community. Early in my formation of trying to grapple with the call to ministry, there was a couple in our church, and the woman of the couple, her name was Joy. She was our worship leader at church. And as we got closer and closer to Wayne and Joy, we found like they were some of the hippest people on the block. But more than that, they had this interesting calling. And they knew that early in their marriage that for whatever circumstance, they weren't going to be parents, that she was unable to have kids. But she refused to be denied. And she said these big prayers to God. God, if I can't have biological children, I want you to give me 1,000 spiritual kids. Lives that I can pour into and give my best to so they can be affirmed in their faith. Can I watch over 1,000 people in my lifetime? Let me just say, I don't know if I would be here if it wasn't the close proximity and the affirmation and the encouragement of Joy in my life, one of my spiritual moms. So what I want to say this morning before we dive into Psalm 128 is that I want to affirm the biological moms in this room, but also the spiritual moms in this room. So we can have every woman in this room stand. I'd like to honor all of them in our midst this morning. Amen. Praise God for you. You can be seated. With that in mind, let's go to Psalm 128, because at the center of this psalm, it really is a blessing over a dad and his household, but the mom is a crucial piece to it. But before we get to some of the text, I want to get some of the background of it, because I think it speaks to the thought of this psalm as well. First thing is this, is that a lot of scholars suggest that Psalm 128 was a song that was written later in the Old Testament history, a time that we call the post-exile years. If you're familiar with the Old Testament history, in 587 BC, Babylon and the empire came to Israel, and they sacked Jerusalem, they brought it to its ruins, and they began to divide families and carry some off into exile and leaving others in extreme vulnerability in their homeland. So if you can imagine, maybe a modern-day equivalent of what was going on in the Old Testament period is like modern-day Syria, of people being dispersed all over to different geographical parts of the world, and sometimes families being pulled away from one another. Dads dying in battle, older brothers dying in battle, moms being shipped off in one direction, young kids being shipped off in the other direction, and the lowest of the lowly are left among the ruins of the city of Jerusalem. But a few decades later, God allows them to come back to their homeland. And so there's 1,000 questions hanging in the air in the later part of the Old Testament story. Should we develop our culture once again? Is it safe for us to build the walls and to build the city and to build the temple and to start families again? Or is there going to be another empire that's going to come in among us, that's going to surround our city, it's going to bring it to ruins and tear apart families again? Now, there's a temptation for people to say, yeah, we better just hedge our bets and say, let's just keep the family unit small, let's not get our hopes up and be paralyzed with fear. But what we see in this psalm is a psalm of blessing. That even though all that destruction and calamity has happened in the past, we believe in a God of the past, of the present, of the future. And if this God is for us, who can be against us? Let's rebuild and let's start families again. And so the first thing I want to say about Psalm 128 is that this is a psalm with guts. And it should be something that informs us in our current faith community. There's a lot of messaging in our culture that's built upon fear. There are many leaders in our culture who are gathering people together on a common enemy identity, convincing us we should be scared to death of 1,000 different sources out there. But if there's a modern day community that needs to resist fear, to cast it out because of perfect love, and to be people of hope, it is the people of God. And psalms like this inform our faith. It informed Jesus' mother. When the angel came to Mary and began to convey this amazing message of salvation, there was not a lot of external evidence that this was a good time to have a Savior born in Israel. But instead of being paralyzed with fear, Jesus' mother Mary said, I am your servant. Do what you'd please. And she created space for God to work a way when there didn't seem to be a way in the midst of her own culture. May we go and do likewise. Second thing is this is a psalm of blessing. If you go to verses 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 of Psalm 128, there's a theme that's repeated again and again, or it's blessing and it's prosperity. You'll see in verses 1 and 2 and 4 and 5, blessed are those who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to him. You will eat the fruit of your labor. Blessings and prosperity will be yours. Yes, this will be the blessing for the man who fears the Lord. May the Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. So again and again, there seems to be a theme, and it's repeated. It's squashed into this very short song that we could be people who expect blessing. If we go back to the original language of the Hebrew language, about where this text comes from, if we give like a modern-day layman's term of what does it mean to be blessed, here's my definition to be blessed: to have all of your needs within arm's reach. It's where your needs aren't all the way out there, and you believe that you may never get your hands on them. Or to put it another way, being blessed is like living in a man cave. It's like all of it is here in one place. This is Mother's Day, so maybe not a man cave, but a she shed. she shed. Got to be careful when you say that one at church, or she shed. Does anybody have a she shed? Anybody? Nice. Totally. Nice. It's to have everything in your midst. And so here, as they come back from exile, they have like this temptation to have like a lowly, pessimistic view of life. But the song is a song of hope. And again, the refrain is, you're going to be blessed. And notice the different places where blessing takes shape in this psalm. You notice early on in this psalm, there's a blessing in the household. There's this idea of a wife being fruitful and young kids being like springs from around the table. But it goes further than that, just not in the household, but also in Jerusalem, that Jerusalem would prosper, the capital city, the place where God's temple dwelled. But at the very end, there's this admonition and there's this hope that there could be peace in Israel, which there's something else being said there. That if there's peace in Israel, if it's prosperous, this early community would have believed that the whole world was going to prosper. They believed as God's chosen people that they were the advanced model of what humanity was going to look like. And so you have these three different realms. You have the home. You have like the faith and religious life. You have the whole cosmos being steeped in God's blessing and God's goodness. And what I want to say is that the Christian life, as we look at the scriptures and their ramifications, as we study our story, these are three environments in which we give our investment as well. We invest in the home, we invest in the church life, and we invest in creation, in the cosmos, in the rest of the world. Now, if you look at that, you look at the amount of time that you have, the amount of time that I have, we give some meditation, this looks like a lot of work. To give our best into three different arenas seems like challenging work. But I think if you and I could do this, if we could apply ourselves in this direction, if you and I have ever had this type of balance in our life, I think the common response for all of us and the common witness is that we sense that we're in the middle of God's will as we invest in these three different areas. I guess what I want to say this morning is that there's a temptation to only invest in two or one of these areas, living a life that's out of balance. And because of that, we're not experiencing the depth of life that God desires for us. For instance, there might be some of us who we have like the home life and we have the world life. We don't have really the church life going. So we gather our kids around common events, and we have this keen interest in the world being changed and the world getting better. And we say slogans like, be the change that you want to see in the world. And so we have this posture towards the world that we like to go help the world and go out there and just make the best of it. But without the church, we're missing something with that posture. What we're missing is the opportunity to link up with other people who also have an interest in the world. We believe here in the church and as followers of Jesus Christ that God so loved the world, the whole world, that he gave his only son. And so as we engage in the life of the church, we link up with other people who have that same interest. But the church also helps us with another cause, to have us to be reminded again and again that without Christ, we can't change the world, that we're just going to break the world even further. It helps us to have a more humble, holistic posture. Because without Christ, we tend to run into the world, we tend to do our best, but we overlook people who aren't like us. We tend to miss out on things that we're blind to because the church hasn't opened our eyes and the witness of Christ hasn't opened our eyes to it. And so the admonition is not just to invest in the home and the world and to get busy out there, but also to add the component of church life to help us develop that faithful posture as we face the world and try to make the most of our lives within it. Well, the other way around, sometimes we invest in the home and we invest in the church, but we leave the world alone. So we sing songs in church and we sing songs at home. We have devotions around the table at home, and we're like the church rats. Like anytime the doors are open, we're there, okay? Every committee, we want to be on it. Any sign-up sheet, our name's at the very top of it. Like our life is soaked in these two arenas, but because of that activity, we've run out of time or influence to actually be on mission with God in the world around us. And because of that, our life is a tad misshapen. We don't know how to interact with people outside the church. We have to feed them questions, or else we don't know how to discuss this common events with them in the break room or at the ball field as our kids are playing baseball together. And so we need to get back out there along with these other two environments and to invest in the world again. Or to put it another way, have you ever met that person in your life who they know all the answers in Bible trivia and they can hum all the tunes on K-Love, but there's still something about them. You're like, I don't know if I want to introduce my non-Christian neighbor to them because it may not go so well. One of my friends in ministry, Brian Bieringer, he's a youth pastor, and he's from Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is one of like the publishing havens of the evangelical Christian world. There's more churches per capita than probably any other city in the United States in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I think angels sing in Grand Rapids, and people's dogs hum the tune of all creatures of our God and King in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But a lot of kids in Grand Rapids, they have this sanitized life. They're born into a home where devotions happen at the table. They go to Christian school from kindergarten all the way through college, and their parents are in permadebt because of it. They go to churches where they're there all the time, and they have this sanitized life. So one of my favorite things that my friend likes to do is that trip that he takes every 3 years where he takes his high school students to the Dominican Republic so they can do some international missions. And for the first time, some of these youth group all-stars sanitized Christianity. This is the first time that they go outside the boundary to a whole different world. And they meet kids their age who don't have 4 pairs of Jordans, who don't have iPads, who don't get to play Fortnite, who live and die on $1 or $2 a day. And when these teens from Grand Rapids meet these teens from the Dominican Republic, they recognize that even though they don't have all the stuff, they've got more joy and peace than they've ever had in their life. And it cracks them open to a wider worldview. That somehow, without all the stuff and without all the sanitized Christian experience, these kids can know the joy of the Lord, maybe even at a greater depth than they do in their sanitized environment. And that's at stake if we sanitize our life and don't get out there and be on mission in God's world. So as a family, let's meditate for a moment. Are we investing in the home, in the church, but have we forsaken the unique opportunities and gifts that we have to nourish the world around us? But last but not least, I think sometimes we have this temptation to develop our time in the church and develop our time in the world, but we forsake the home. We get busy with travel soccer and travel baseball and travel chess and travel early filmmaking and youth symphony. All these things are great. Foursquare, national tournaments, all that stuff's great. All that activity out there. And then we go on trips and we're at church all the time. We're on different committees and our schedule is full of stuff outside the home. So any time spent in the home is a time when we're languished in our energy. And everyone goes into their separate rooms. And we barely connect in the life of faith towards one another. In fact, if anybody were to knock on our door after all of our church and world activity, instead of being peaceful and people who are full of praise, we're full of irritability, and we're short-tempered, and we're filled with anger. Yeah, I think sometimes there's a temptation to think that church life is nourishing our home life. Or to put it another way, I was stunned one day in the middle of a doctor of ministry class when a professor told me in a recent study that 8 out of 10 pastors' wives or husbands and their kids wish that their dad or their mom wasn't a pastor. Those are terrible odds. And we've got this interesting little commitment in the Skillen household. We love the work of the church. We love all that it brings to us. But if at any moment the Skillens begin to say, Dad, the church is stealing you, I will go scout for the Milwaukee Brewers or something like that. And somebody else can do this work. Because as a mentor of mine said, what good is it if I win the whole world to Christ and I lose my family? You may not agree with that. I don't agree with you. Because my family is the most important field of ministry that I have. So we've got to find a way to keep these 3 fields operating and vibrant and enthused with the life of God. And going back to that early quotation, something is not lost until mom loses it. This is why we got to count on moms, because if there's somebody in our household who can help keep our eye on all these arenas, it's mom. Sure, statistics say that if the dad goes to church, there's a good chance that the kids go to church and the whole family works on the faith together. I agree with that. But I also know that the mom seems to be the last line of defense. And if she can find a way to keep her eye on these three arenas of the church life, the faithful life, I know there's a good chance for all of our homes to be steeped in the blessing of God. In order to get here, I want to introduce you to one of the best moms in the history of the church. It's Susanna Wesley. How many of you guys grew up in a Methodist church and you traded teams to the Calvinists? Okay, so you know who Susanna Wesley is. Susanna Wesley was a spouse of Samuel Wesley, who was a churchman in the Church of England, and she had a lot of kids, but only 8 of them survived after infanthood. And so she raised kids, and she taught them at home, and she cleaned the house, and she cooked all their meals. And there was even a space and time where her husband was away, and she was left all alone to take care of all the stuff in her household, to teach her kids, to cook all their meals, to take care of their house that burned down, and to also take care of some of the duties of the life of the church. This was a busy woman, and if anyone needed to have bitterness towards the church, it was this woman. But she actually kept the faith. She had this really interesting habit of reaching out to all of her kids. She would teach them all their different lessons throughout the day, but she also sat down with each of them every single day, and she asked them about their faith, and they would pray together. There was even a season when her husband was away. He was defending a friend who was on trial for heresy, and he was thrown in jail because of it. So for over a year, she was left alone to raise the kids and to take care of the church. There's this story that because she couldn't pastor in the church, she would hold this Bible study after church where her kids attended, and she would read a sermon that was from one of her husbands in his file. And she had up to 200 people showing up to the afternoon meeting and only 15 people showing up to church on Sunday morning. How awesome is that, right? But she wrote a letter to her husband one day to talk about the difficulty of what she was facing because of his absence, but the depth of her calling. And I think it's at the heart of these 3 arenas. This is what she said. I'm a woman, but I'm also the mistress to a large family. And though the superior charge of the souls contained in it lies on you, she's talking to her husband, yet in your long absence, I cannot but look upon every soul you leave under my charge as a talent committed to me under a trust. I am not a man nor a minister, yet as a mother and as a mistress, I felt I ought to do more than I had done up to now. What an amazing proclamation. And people, as they commented on her life, they said that there are times throughout the day after she was cooking and cleaning and teaching all the kids, she wanted some alone time with Jesus. So this is all that she got. She would take her apron and she would put it over her face. And when she did that, the kids knew this is Susanna in Jesus' time. But you can imagine, like, as she got up before the sun got up, and as she took care of all of her kids of all these different ages, you can imagine the stains that had gathered on the apron before those moments when she put the apron over her head. You can imagine those moments where she was trying to catch her breath and offer a prayer to Jesus. She also had these thoughts. Is this as good as it's going to get? As she smells spit up, drool, lasagna, you name it, on the apron from the activities of that day. But she didn't quit. She continued to raise those kids under those impossible circumstances. A couple of those kids grew up and were significant for the life of church history. The first one was John Wesley. After 66,000 sermons preached, he brought Western Europe and parts of the American colonies to their knees, and he gave us a method of doing church to where the uneducated and common person could seek Jesus on their own. 66,000 sermons. I began to ask myself, what have I done with my life? 66,000 sermons. Not to be outdone by Charles Wesley, who the number grows each time people begin to talk about how many hymns he's written, but he wrote maybe 10,000 hymns in his lifetime, 5 a day. He's just doing nothing but writing hymns. Imagine if American Idol was around at that time or something like that. And it all came because she had passion for Jesus. She had passion for her home. She had passion for the church. And she had love for God's world. Her offspring shook the world because of the example they saw in their home. If we go back to Psalm 128, we find that the mother is at the heart of this song of blessing in Psalm 128. where it says to the man, your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots all around your table. Somehow, what an incredible image for mom. She is the life source for all that takes shape in the home. So moms and spiritual moms this day, I implore you as a pastor of this church, we're counting on you. We need your energy. We need your enthusiasm. And we make space in our community for your unique gifts, your worth, and for your work. Because it's not lost if you haven't lost it. Keep your sights set on these three environments, and our church, in our world, will thrive.